Okay, this is the only scene that I remember from a Burt Reynolds movie called The End. Burt Reynolds' character decided that he was going to commit suicide by swimming out into the ocean, but then he has a change of heart.
I want to live! I want to live! I can never make it. Help me, Lord. Please. I promise not to try and kill myself anymore. Save me, and I swear I'll be a better father. I'll be a better man. I'll be a better everything. All I ask is, make me a better swimmer. Oh, God. I can't do this to Julie. We can't do this to Julie. Oh, God, let me live, and I promise to obey every one of the 10 Commandments. I shall not kill. I shall not commit adultery. I shall not. I'll learn the 10 Commandments. Just get me back to the beach. I'll be honest in business. I promise not to sell lakeside lots unless there's a lake around. I want to see another sunrise. I want to see another sunset. It was a mistake, God. I never really wanted to kill myself. I just wanted to get your attention. Help me make it. I'll give you 50% of everything I make. 50%, God. I want to point out that nobody gives 50%. I'm talking gross, God. I think I'm gonna make it. You won't regret this, Lord. I'll obey every commandment. I'll see my parents more often. No more cheating in business once I get rid of those 9 acres in the desert. And I'm gonna start donating that 10% right away. I know I said 50%, Lord, but 10% to start. If you don't want your 10%, then don't take it. I know it was you that saved me, but it was also you that made me sick.
Okay, so the summer after my 4th grade year, we went and lived in York, Nebraska, because my dad was working for York College, York University now, a church-associated school, instead of Harding. But we didn't move there permanently. We just went there that one summer. Well, we came back from York after the summer, and the very first day, I think, we attended the very first funeral that I remember attending. And it happened to be the funeral of a kid who was just 2 years older than me. And he had died from leukemia. Mike Webb was his name. And so, the problem of death was a harsh enough reality for me already, but this was more striking because, here was this 6th grade boy, in a coffin. And if he had been sick before we left, we didn't know about it. I don't think anyone really did. But we returned 3 months later to be introduced to the result of this disease that we had never heard of before, leukemia. And when I was in the 10th grade, One of Mike's classmates, Stephen Tucker, was the quarterback on the football team and a starter, of course, on the basketball team. But during basketball season, he began to have trouble keeping pace on the court. And as he put it, he thought at first he was just loafing. But after just trying to push himself harder, he finally went to the doctor and was told that he too had leukemia. Well, he told no one what was going on. But in the 5 years since Mike had died, a new treatment called chemotherapy had been developed, and it worked for Steve. However, Steve initially had no expectation that he would not die from this same disease that had killed his friend Mike. This was a class of like 20 kids. Well, we had chapel every day at Harding Academy Christian School. And after Steve was in remission, he asked to speak to the student body in chapel. And not one of us will ever forget that speech. It was the first that we knew of exactly what he had been going through. And this was, a very small, close-knit school, about 25 in each class at the most. And what I remember struck me most about his reaction when he thought he would soon be dead was the change in his priorities. Everything that was so important to him before, like grades and sports and even that girl that he wanted to go out with, presumably, he didn't say this in the speech, but all of that suddenly was not so important. On the other hand, when he was at church, every word became important. Mm-hmm. And his mind didn't wander, he said, during songs and prayers and sermons. And his Bible study wasn't a duty. His own prayers were more real to him. Mm. Death is not a good thing, but it can bring some very good things. What would you do differently, or how would your life be different if you knew that you would die very soon? Well, even Jesus was subject to the problem of death. And death is not a good thing, but it can result in good things. And one of those good things is focus. That's what Steve found. It brings things into focus. We see what is really important. And so Jesus would have preferred to let death be just one aspect of what it means to be human that would not be brought quite so clearly into focus for him. He knew that it was going to happen. And as he approaches his death, we can see into his heart through the detailed memories of his closest friend, John, probably his closest friend. And it's found in chapters 13 through 17 of John's Gospel. We're going to focus on chapter 15 today, but look first again at verse 1 of chapter 13. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. Now, as we've seen already, this leads into the story of Jesus washing the nasty feet of his disciples, and then a long talk about what is going to happen soon, which is a part of what we'll look at today. And then he'll go on to a long prayer for himself, his disciples, and those who would believe in him because of his disciples. Most of us, hopefully all of us. And we'll look at that prayer next week. But if we want to be sure of what was important to Jesus, then what he wanted most of all has to be in these verses, don't you think? So this has to be the best place to turn. So what we need most, as he lays it out, is to be connected with God. In chapter 15, Jesus has some words that are actually pretty harsh for those who choose to never connect themselves with him. And he brings some clarity to another problem that comes before death, and that's the problem of suffering. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. Now, since this is about focus, let's focus in on the basics and answer just two questions this morning. First of all, how can we bear fruit? Well, the first thing that Jesus says there, of course, is to be connected with him, first of all. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. When we rented this house down in Santa Clarita, we didn't act like a typical renter family. We actually improved the house, okay, and the yard. Well, the yard had no trees, no shrubs, and there was this tree that the church had bought this property, and we were moving a building from that property to another site. And there was this tree, an oleander tree, which they're not really trees, I don't think. They just train them to be trees sometimes. And I thought, I'll ask and see, the property owner if I can have that tree. He says, sure, take it. So it looked pretty small to me. Well, I dug around it, and finally got it to where it looked like it could be loosened. And I got some help to come and try to help me with the tree. Well, at first we couldn't move it at all. And then I got more help, and we got it up in a truck and took it over to the house, and I dug a hole and planted it. And not too long before it died. Okay. It withered pretty desperately. So I cut off some of the branches, just a few, wanted to keep as much as I could. And it just got worse. It just got worse and worse. Finally, everything looked dead. And so I just cut all the branches off, but I left it there in the ground. Well, guess what happened? It finally sprung, more branches. And it got to be where every year I had to cut off lots and lots of branches just to keep it from just overgrowing completely. Well, what had happened is the sort of the miracle, you might call it, of pruning. I mean, that's why we prune these silly mulberry trees out here every year. You're supposed to prune them all the way back so that they'll grow back, and that is actually a helpful thing in growth. And so the truth is that we have to be connected, though, to the vine. You can prune the limb off and leave it on the ground, and it would grow. Okay, so we have to be connected to the vine, and we have to stay connected to the vine. And this is where perseverance comes in. That's what the pruning is all about. Pruning is not pretty. So as a gardener, now sometimes you might like to just trim things up, cut away the dead leaves, make them look better, and even that can be beneficial to the plant, and it can help it flourish. But nobody likes a really serious pruning, right? And so Basically, we ended up with this tall, ugly stump in our yard, and we have this tall, ugly stump out in the churchyard. And, it's a little embarrassing to let the neighborhood look at it. Well, when Jesus talks about pruning, Jesus is talking about suffering. Everyday struggles and everyday effort are more like trimming and cultivating and fertilizing and watering. In athletic terms, it's the equivalent of practice and conditioning. And that takes some serious effort. Sometimes you don't like to do those things, even in gardening or in athletics. But actually, like in athletics, it can get to feel pretty good. People even get addicted to exercise, right, Derek? I'm sorry. So we need to pray, though, and study our Bibles and listen to preachers and teachers who may not always be entertaining, and find ways to live out our faith. But that's not pruning. That may be difficult sometimes. We may not like it. But pruning is the stuff that we don't ever enjoy. Things that we don't like at all. Stuff that makes us question our faith. Stuff that we don't even think we can endure. Stuff that maybe even makes us question God's love for us. Maybe you remember my conversation with my landlord about a string of incidents. I had to drive all the way from Santa Clarita down to Woodland Hills because that's where his office was. And if I was one day behind, he was going to charge me $200 extra rent. And that was kind of the way he was. And so I was really struggling to get a hold of the money one month. And I got down there and I explained to him what all had happened. I'd had a car engine go out and things like that. And so I told him several things that had happened. And he at the end of it said, wow, somebody up there must not like you. Mm. Well, we happened to be during the Pepperdine lectures, which is going to be week after next, or week after this. But it happened to be during the Pepperdine lectures, and that year we were looking at the book of Job, particularly. Mm. And there was a preacher from Ireland named Joe McGuigan. And Joe had a wife who was very, very, she had a disease that was very difficult. And he had to, carry her from her bed and get her up and change her diaper and things that no man ever wants to do, much less for his wife. And he talked about how it finally occurred to him that this wasn't the result of a lack of love on God's part for him. It was actually the lesson that Job learned in his suffering. Job's suffering did not mean that someone up there didn't like him. Go back and read the first verses of Job, and you'll see that quite to the contrary, it all happened because God trusted Job. God knew that Job would prove Satan wrong. Mm. And he knew that Job was not only faithful because God had blessed him. Job's suffering was actually then evidence of God's trust in Job, not evidence that God didn't like it. So I told my landlord about this because he was Jewish. I thought, he could appreciate maybe this. He might be able to connect a little bit with this Old Testament Jewish hero. And my landlord's response to that profound insight was, well, that's why I read the Times. I get more out of it. Mm-hmm. Well, the lesson of Job on suffering as evidence of God's trust rather than God's displeasure was a very helpful insight for me. But in defense of my landlord's blasphemous response, it doesn't really explain all suffering. What about the suffering of those who are not paragons of faith like Job? Well, some people suffer as a result of their wickedness. True. But what about those who are neither paragons of faith like Job nor extremely wicked? Mm. What about the random singing nature of suffering? Some wicked actions do not seem to bring on any suffering at all. Some faithful people seem to never have to prove their perseverance in the way that Job did. So I would venture to say that we would be hard put to explain most suffering. Will we ever really understand why God allows suffering? Well, of course not. Just when we think we have arrived at some turning point in our understanding, some new challenge comes along, and we're reminded once again that we are not and will never be omniscient. We will never be all-knowing. We will always, in the end, be forced to rely on faith and hope. So, we actually become more than we could. We get to a point where we understand more than we ever could if we never suffer. But the only absolute necessity to staying connected is perseverance. So, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a rut and nothing is happening in your life or as a result of your life? Now, that's kind of an important thing to feel those ways if we're wanting the right things and those things aren't happening and we feel like we should be doing better. But we can be sure, that wanting to bear fruit is the right thing, even if we don't always know what that will mean. Now, one thing that often confuses the struggle is a lack of clarity on what the fruit really is. If we think that the fruit is new Christians, this is kind of what I was brought up to understand, to believe, new church members. If we think that that's the fruit, then we may actually be thinking that we have a power that we do not have. And we may therefore feel guilty and discouraged because we can't identify much, if any, fruit growing on our branches, because we think we have the power to produce that kind of fruit. Maybe you think that there's a certain person that you work with, or a certain friend, or maybe one of your own children, or your parents, or someone else that's very close to you, that you should be able to get connected to the vine. And yet it just doesn't seem to happen. In fact, you live many years as a branch on the vine, but you never know of anyone that gets connected to the vine because of your direct words or actions. Well, are you a branch that bears no fruit? Will you be cut off and thrown into the fire? Well, this is actually how Satan wants you to think. This is what I was brought up when preachers wanted me to think this way. But this kind of thinking will ruin your faith. First of all, we must keep reminding ourselves that we are not in charge of growth. Even Paul, the apostle, had to come to grips with this reality, and he clarified the reality of his role and our role in the planting and growth process. He says, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. Well, then you might say, well, but if followers of Jesus are not the fruit, if we have no control over whether we see growth in the hearts of those we interact with and encounter, then what do we have control over? What is the fruit? How do we bear fruit? Well, first of all, we love those with whom we are connected. All right, let's look at my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command.